I remember driving down the highway many years ago, trying to keep myself entertained by counting license plates from different states, some even from different countries, and by reading bumper stickers along the way, just to kind of keep myself preoccupied occupied on a long trip. And for those of you of a certain age, let's say under the age of 30, bumper stickers are what we had before memes. Instead of, in the 20th century, instead of posting our thoughts all over our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts, we posted them on the back of our cars. And I remember coming upon this one car that had a bumper sticker that said, "Lord, protect me from your followers." I was indignant. Come on, really? And I thought to myself, I've known a lot of really great followers of the Lord. You don't need protection from them. But then I thought about it a little more. As many great ones as there are, every now and then you can get one that can be downright hurtful. After all, we're still sinners, aren't we? Even as people of faith. And then I thought about it some more. It was a long trip. And I thought about, "Lord, protect me from your followers." And I thought, I bet you the first person ever to say that saying, "Lord, protect me from your followers," was probably Jesus himself. When you think about it, there were many people who followed Jesus in Jesus' day. Some who felt liberated, healed, who desired to follow him and walk in his footsteps. But there were others who were hurtful to Jesus. Particularly those who were part of what was called we still call the religious establishment. The religious folks. The establishment. Those who held a certain power and kind of status in the community and who were threatened by Jesus' liberating word of grace and mercy. This word about a God of unconditional love. And those who were part of that religious establishment tried to shut Jesus down. Don't come in this world and start messing around with our religion, Jesus, with all this relationship with God kind of talk. No, there were some who tried to hurt Jesus. I don't know whether he would have ever said, "Lord, protect me from your followers," but he certainly experienced a lot of resistance. And don't go home and say Mark was preaching an anti-Semitic word today. Jesus was Jewish, and there were a lot of people who were Jewish who followed Jesus. I am clearly talking about the religious establishment today. Those who wielded a certain power and enjoyed status in the community, and they used their religion to protect that. Just take a look at what was going on in the synagogue that day when Jesus was teaching. Jesus was teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath, preaching, and a woman came in. Someone who was bent low, says Luke's gospel. For 18 years, she had been bent low. Luke's a doctor, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail about why she was bent low. Maybe we might say today, it could have been something like osteoporosis. Or maybe it was a spiritual thing that was keeping her bent low. Maybe she was bent low in her grief, her sorrow, her sadness. Maybe she was bent low by some injustice that she'd experienced in her community. We don't know. We just know that for 18 years, she was bent low. She could not stand upright. And there in the synagogue, on the Sabbath, Jesus said to her, "Woman," and for those of you who are raised on the King James Version of the Bible, "Thou art loosed." It's one of my favorite sayings from when I was a kid. "Thou art loosed." It sounds so great. What he really said was, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." Whatever that ailment is, you are set free. And then Jesus laid hands upon her, and immediately she stood upright and began praising God. Well, you and I, faithful Christians, you and I who are part of a faith community and a tradition that's been at this for 2,000 years, we read that part of the story and say, of course, Jesus has a power to heal. Jesus has a power to help us stand upright. Jesus has a word that will help restore us. But if you're the synagogue leader that day, in that era, You're the synagogue leader who's enjoyed a certain status in the congregation. You've enjoyed a certain power within the congregation. People normally turn to you for answers, but now they're turning to Jesus. You might be put out just a little bit. That's just exactly what happened. The synagogue leader came shouting to Jesus and shouting at the crowd, "Look, you can't heal on the Sabbath. There's 6 days to be healed on. Go away and come back on another day other than the Sabbath. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath." Now, he's got a bit of a point. Not a big point, but a bit of a point. Honor the Sabbath. Keep it holy. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right? But he doesn't have the whole picture here. He just has his religion. You see, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus brings a broader and perhaps deeper understanding of the law. And he does it through a simple illustration. He calls to the synagogue leader and the crowd there that day, and he says, "Wait a minute. Which one of you has an ox or a donkey and doesn't untie it on the Sabbath and go let that ox or donkey get a drink of water?" And of course, all of them do that. Nobody's going to let their livestock die of dehydration, right? And Jesus says, well, look, if you'd be willing to do that for your ox or your donkey, why on earth would we keep this woman bent low when we have a word and a power to heal her even on the Sabbath? Jesus brought a deeper understanding of Sabbath. That Sabbath isn't just about honoring a religion or honoring a law. It's also about living out of that faith, living out of that religion. The religious establishment was often threatened by the things that Jesus did, the liberation, the healing that he brought. They were threatened by that. And so they often threw the book at Jesus, so to speak. They tried to press down on him with the heavy hand of the law. Wait a minute, Jesus, you can't do that. But ultimately, weren't they just protecting their own status within the community? You know, I remember preaching many, many years ago, not in this congregation, just in case anybody's worried about this. I was preaching about law and faith, religion and relationship. And I was talking about the Book of Order, the Presbyterian, part of the Presbyterian Church's constitution. It's our guidebook. Although I often say it's soft cover for a reason. You know, it's meant to bend and flex a little bit at the guidance of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. Well, this person came up to me after worship and said, "Pastor, don't you ever forget that that Book of Order is what makes us Presbyterian." I said, well, that may be true, but don't you ever forget that Book of Order isn't what makes us Christian. There's a bigger word that makes us Christian, and it's the word of Jesus Christ. I think that's what was going on in the synagogue that day. Jesus was responding to a spirit of compassion, and he had every right to bring healing to that person on the Sabbath. But the synagogue leader, he was coming up to Jesus waving the Book of Order in his hand, saying, you can't do that. That's not allowed. Picture it this way. Religion is the vehicle that carries our faith. It's the vehicle that keeps our faith alive and growing and thriving. Our religion includes things like annual rituals, annual dates, Christmas, Easter, Ash Wednesday, Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday. Those are the things that allow us to express what our faith has experienced. They're the vehicle that help us carry our religion. But sometimes we start to worship the vehicle. The vehicle becomes more important than the faith that it's sustaining. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that you want to buy a new car. And you love your family, you love your friends, and the reason you want to buy a new car is so that you and your family can go places. You want to go hiking, or you want to go on picnics in the park, and you want to do some fun things that'll continue to nurture and sustain your family. You also want a car that's safe. You want to protect them. So you go buy this car. It's going to cost a little bit more, but it is comfortable, it's big enough for your family, and it's going to keep them safe for a good long time. But in order to buy this car, you have to take on a little extra work because it's a little more money than you wanted to spend. And you start focusing your energy on the car because, you know, it's of great value. So Saturday morning when your family comes to you and says, hey, are we going to go for a drive in the country? You say, no, I got to stay home and wash the car. I need to wax it and take good care of it. I got to keep the value up on the car. And if you're like a lot of folks I've seen lately, you're going to take your leaf blower out and use it as a hairdryer for your car. And then they say, well, how about midweek? Can we go sometime when you get off work? Oh, no, we can't do that because I've taken on extra work, so I have to work later to pay for the car. The whole reason you bought the car, which was the family, the time together, the love, the nurture, all that kind of goes out the window because your focus is now turned toward the car. Your devotion, your energy, your love is on the vehicle that carries the family and not the family itself. I think sometimes that's what's going on with the religious establishment or the religion itself. It's the vehicle that carries our faith. It allows our experiences with God to continue to grow and be strengthened. But when the devotion becomes on the religion, you can't do it this way or it must be done that way, somehow I think we start missing the point. You have to admit, sometimes folks confuse religion with faith. They confuse religion with relationship. Some, like the synagogue leader, will even go so far as to use their religion to avoid going into deeper relationship with God. Some will even use their religion to avoid what is sometimes considered maybe some of the messy or the difficult work of our faith, the love, the compassion that is called out of us. It's just plain easier to go through the motions of religion than to do the hard work or the important work of compassionately loving God and loving neighbor. To love God with all our heart, our strength, our mind, our devotion, and to love our neighbor as one of our own. And sometimes people don't like those two things to get tangled up with each other. It's easier just to worship and put on a beautiful worship, a wonderful worship, and maybe you've been in churches like that before where you're like, wow, this worship was outstanding, but they'll just as easily chase the poor away from their front door so that they can have this lovely, outstanding worship. Beth and I were touring this beautiful basilica in Old Montreal years ago. Just gorgeous, 400-year-old basilica. It's designed on the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And this is a beautiful church that's there to glorify God. And as we're going in, we heard this docent saying to a panhandler in front of the church, he kind of gave him a push down the steps and says, you need to go away. The church is not a place for the poor. And we thought, oh my gosh, how far we've strayed. We've allowed the religion, we've allowed the status to confuse the work of the hands, the work of the gospel, the work of compassion and mercy. Some of you may remember the name Tony Campolo. Tony Campolo was a sociology professor, but also a great preacher, a new evangelical, and perhaps one of the most prominent evangelical voices of the late 20th century. And Tony Campolo was speaking at a big conference a number of years ago, and it was keynote speaker, and finally it was his turn to speak in this big auditorium. Thousands of people had gathered there, and all excited to hear Tony Campolo speak. And Tony Campolo got up on the platform, and he began by saying, good morning, y'all. It's great to be here. It's so good to be among so many religious folks together in worship today. And everyone went, woo, because it always feels great to be among people with like mind and like spirit, right? Yeah, all the religious folks gathered together. And he said, now wait a minute. And with Tony Campolo, you know something's coming. Tony Campolo says, wait a minute. Before you get too excited, let me tell you what I mean by religious. When I say good to be among so many religious people. He said, According to research and statistics, roughly 35,000 to 40,000 people die every single day because of hunger and hunger-related illnesses. Many of them children starving throughout the world. He said, and you people don't give a bleep. Only he didn't say bleep. You know this story, don't you, Reverend? He said the big kahuna of cuss words right there in worship. He said, you people don't give a bleep. He said, now let me tell you what I mean by religious. He said, by religious I mean you people are more offended that I just cussed in worship than you are that 40,000 people will die today of starvation and hunger. He said, that's what I mean by religious. I think for Tony Campolo, in fact, for that matter, for Jesus and many of the Old Testament prophets, there's an understanding that you cannot honor Sabbath if you're also ignoring the cries of the poor and the hungry, those in need, those who cry out for our help. We may put on one of the most beautiful worship services. We might have a high steeple and incredible stained glass windows and the great choirs and orchestras and all the trappings of high worship. But if our hands aren't going to work in caring for those who are hungry, we just may be missing the point. Worship and work must be one, says the new hymn that we've been learning these past couple of weeks to go along with our series. To truly honor Sabbath, our hearts need to go to God in devotion, but our hands need to get busy in the good and important work of mission and justice, caring for those who are hungry and in need. And Jesus was not out of line in the least when he healed that woman in the synagogue. You can worship God and care for those who are hurting at the same time, and it comes straight out of the scriptures that Jesus was teaching. It comes straight out of the Hebrew scriptures. Amos, the minor prophet, chapter 5. Thus says the Lord through the prophet Amos, I hate. We don't like using that word, but God uses it right there in Amos. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn worship. Even though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like the waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Hearts to God, for sure, but hands to work. The Apostle Paul understood this when he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but I don't have agape, love, if I don't have love that is a verb, love that is active, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And of course, Jesus said the two greatest commandments were to love God with all your heart and your strength, your mind. The second is the same. You got to love your neighbors. You got to love the ones who are hungry as well. Walter Brueggemann, in his book Sabbath as Resistance, Saying No to the Culture of Now, calls worship without justice a phony Sabbath. Worship, he says, that does not lead to neighborly compassion and justice cannot be faithful worship of Yahweh. The offer is a phony Sabbath. And I would add to Brueggemann's words that the offer is a phony Sabbath, and it is an offer then that is declined by God. God does not want our Sabbath, does not want our worship, does not want our hearts in devotion if our hands are not also going to the world, going to those who are in need in terms of our care and compassion. Authentically worshiping God, honoring Sabbath is more than just a religious practice. That's too easy for the religious establishment to hang its hat on that. Look, we worship God and we do it so well. Yeah, but you're ignoring the poor who are on your front steps. Authentic devotion originates not in a book, but in our hearts. It's expressed most genuinely when we lift our hearts to God and put our hands to work. And I'll let you in on a little secret here if you didn't know this already. Whereas worship and devotion to God reveals who God is, remember, putting God number one, when we put our hands to work, it reveals who we are. It reminds us that we have been created in the very image of God, so says the book of Genesis. And when we do works of compassion and mercy and works of justice and care and kindness, that image within us is revealed. Look, you and I live in a real world. Monday to Saturday, that world muddies up the image of God within us pretty easily. There are a lot of voices out there trying to tell us who we are or what we should do and who we should follow. But when we worship God with our hearts and our hands, the image of God within us is restored. It's restored. We remember that God made us compassionate. That's part of our humanity, to be compassionate. And by caring for those who are in need, that part of our humanity gets restored. I remember a number of years ago when I was serving the church up in Cleveland. On Wednesdays, we had a midweek worship service and speakers series called Hope for the City. And I remember going down from my office on the second floor down to the fellowship hall, which was on the lower level. We weren't allowed to call it the basement, but basically it was a basement. It was the lower level. So I had to go down basically 3 floors. And the elevator always stopped on 1. So you never knew who was going to get on the elevator with you. But I knew this particular day I wanted to get down early because this was the day the mayor was going to be speaking at our Hope for the City. It was going to be jam-packed. Media was going to be there. And I wanted to show out, you know, the senior pastor. And this was just a big boon for the church, a big boon for me that we got the mayor to come and speak. So I get on the elevator up on 2. And it starts going down, and the door opens at 1. And there's a young man there, maybe early 30s, but he's got a cane. And he kind of walks onto the elevator. I said, "Oh, I'm going down to the lower level. I'm guessing you're going up to 2. And he said, "Yes, I am." On the second floor, not far from my office, there was also a midweek Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Some were there by court order, some were there just because they needed it in the middle of their workday. They'd come over and come to this meeting. And I just, you know, okay, I could read this guy. He looked like he was going to 2. He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Are you the pastor?" And I said, "I am, but I'm going down to the lower level first. We've got a service down there. The mayor's speaking." He said, "Pastor, I need some prayers." And I said, "No problem. Tell me what your name is." And I forget what his name was. I said, "I'll keep you in my prayers this week." He said, "No, Pastor, I need prayers right now." And I'm thinking to myself, I got the mayor waiting for me downstairs. I got 200 or 300 people who are gathering for this worship. Where's my place? And then a little light went on. Hearts to God, hands to work, Giuliano. This guy's asking for prayer. I said, "Not a problem." I got off. I rode back up to the first floor, went downstairs, back to the first floor, got off the main floor, and we went into the sanctuary, and we prayed together right then and there. Didn't put him on the prayer list for later in the week. I gave him the time right then and there, right there in the sanctuary. If this was a biblical lesson, it would be the synagogue. Some might have said, "Mark, what are you doing there? You can't do that. The mayor's waiting downstairs." Some might have said, "You're the pastor. You need to greet all these people who are coming in." And I did, just not yet. First, there was a man who was in his early 30s who was dealing with an addiction, and he needed prayer right then and there. He needed a good word, good news from God. He needed someone to hold his hand in the sanctuary and pray with him that day. But here's the thing. I think he was receiving some healing that day, but I think I was too. I think I was remembering who I was, not as the pastor of a high steeple church, but just as a brother and a person of faith who was there, who could bring some hope, and who, it didn't matter if, God's Spirit isn't always working on a 24-hour, time schedule. God's Spirit sometimes interrupts you right then and there. I kept seeing this guy for the rest of my time in Cleveland, a number of years, and never stopped. We'd be out in the busy downtown square, hundreds of people around, and he'd spot me or I'd spot him. And we had this new kind of relationship because I was willing to stop. Or better yet, because he stopped me. He was willing to say, hey, yeah, you're the senior pastor of this big steeple church, but I need prayer right now. Imagine the woman in the synagogue was much like that day on Sabbath, when she came into the synagogue and said, 18 years I've been bent low. We don't know if it was osteoporosis. We don't know if she was bent low by grief. She could have been bent low by some sort of addiction. We don't know. But we do know that there was a very religious person there that day who said, go back and come another day. And then there was a very faithful man named Jesus Christ, who was obedient to both the law and to the spirit of compassion. A man who was willing to put his heart to God and his hands to work by laying that hand upon that woman that day and blessing her with healing. Friends, to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, to follow in the way of Jesus Christ, is to practice a Sabbath that is in a way a little Janus focused. One face toward God, but the other face toward those who are in need. To worship God on Sabbath or any other day is to put our hearts in devotion to God and our hands to work for those who are in need. Praise be to God. Amen.